welcome to our last class with gods that failed. The lectures were a series of excursions to the philosophy of history. We have met few people I will mention again. The idea for the course was given to me by Arthur Koestler, famous writer of 20th century, who wrote a book, God That Failed. And we became friends shortly after he published a book at the beginning of 50s. So he wrote it at the end of the first half of 20th century. It is kind of strange when you say, I was born in the first half of 20th century. And so the book was written also at the end of the first half of 20th century. God That Failed, in which he described his disillusionment with his God, which was the God of revolution, Soviet revolution. After that, I met many idealists in the United States who went through exactly the same course. Many of them here in Fairbanks. So this is one man who gave me the idea that God could fail. I never saw it in this context, you know. It was his God. And many idealists at the break of the century had similar values. To improve the society, they joined the forces of something later they were ashamed of. So we went through the history when it goes up and down. It is like Bach's fugue, going enthusiasm and resolvement, disappointment. The other one, which is kind of my grandfather, is Xenophanes, the great Greek thinker. I call him Einstein of antiquity. He lived in 6th century BC, and he was kind of oddball. He criticized Homer and his poetic work. He criticized Hesiod, who wrote a book about gods. This was kind of preparation for his own two theories, anthropomorphism and hypostatization. He is the first man who explicitly stated new approach to human description of the world, not expecting the message to be received from outside or empirically read by our senses, but message which is coming from within our human nature and being projected. And after you project the message, you find it there, then you are happy. And you forget the process. So he was an exception, ignored. His work was not recognized, and it is amazing that idea like this has to wait for millennia until the beginning of 20th century, when it changes the world. So I call him Einstein of antiquity, who produced a work which was not recognized. At the same time, shortly after, he, as a member of pre-Socratics, those thinkers who laid down the foundation for Western philosophy were called pre-Socratics. I think Xenophanes was the most important one, but unrecognized. the peak of this trend were two Greek thinkers, Plato and Aristotle. What they produced is something what our Western tradition has never seen before. They gave us basic two teachings. Aristotle was pupil of Plato. Aristotle was son of a physician who was court physician of Philip II, and Aristotle himself was teacher of Alexander the Great. So very closely knit world. Aristotle, pupil of Plato, was hired to teach in Plato's academy, which is the first institution of higher learning in human tradition. It was this institution which had an inscription: "Those not knowledgeable in geometry do not enter." Tough inscription. I think most of you would shake and say, "No, I certainly won't enter. I hate math," you know. And so this was the condition. What was in it? Not fear of mathematics, but process of thinking which goes from axioms. Axioms are clear, distinct, self-evident truth. If you are in possession of these axioms, you can do everything else. You can milk down everything from these certainties. Here is a certainty created by both Plato and Aristotle. It is discovery that man cannot live without certainty. And we can give it to you. Plato's certainty was not in this world, but in the world above. And in this world above, there are prototypes of a horse, you know. And all these horses here are copies. There is a prototype of man. I always imagine it is Leonardo's man, you know. and all of us here are copies, temporary copies. Prototypes are immortal. You see the certainty. We are mortal copies of immortal prototypes. How do we know about it? Plato was a great poet. You know, he had explanation. And the explanation was when our soul is coming from above, not from here. The soul is immortal. So we are connection of immortal and mortal body. And when our soul was in the other world of prototypes, it was flying around, you know, and so, you know, here is a chicken. Oh, there was a prototype of a chicken. Remembered chicken, remembered horse, a pig, you know. All these prototypes are hanging, you know, in the heaven. And I remember when I was flying, I saw them too, you know. and now I come to the earth and I see, oh, that's a man.
he reminds me, that's a man, that's a lady. The men and lady were the two earliest prototypes. Men in blue jeans, you know. A lady also in blue jeans. So you see, the striving for certainty produces a philosophy of Plato up there. It reminds you that later on there will be a worldview which believes in something similar. And Aristotle, who listened to it, could not stomach this teaching. He was son of a physician of Philip II. You see, if you are a physician, you try to heal real man, not real, but real man like this, you know, real lady. You are not physician of the man up there, you know. Nobody can give you license, you know, to practice on this, or veterinarian, you know, on this real hen and real pig, you know, and horse. And when you are a physician or veterinarian, you treat here these copies, temporary mortal copies.
Is the ideal essentially a definition?
The ideal is definition of Plato, a dualistic world, explaining that there is an ideal world of prototypes.
Well, the prototype would be a definition essentially.
Yes.
If you say it's a horse, then that's what
Yes,
the horse
we defined,
is. The ideal.
yeah, prototype, and we are too far away as copies, you know. We are just copies, you know. You know, I remember a joke. A young lady sits holding hand of her boyfriend, and they got into some fight, and she withdraw her hand, and she tells him, you know, you are not the real man. I am in love, you know, with a real man. And he withdraws his hand. No, I'm in love with a real woman. You see, this is concept of platonic love. I think all of you went through it. You know how it works. And so Plato gave us this beautiful theory of certainty up there. How to escape from uncertainty. Aristotle changed it only slightly, you know, and both of them play an eminent role in development of Western humanity. When Christianity became established during the first 300 years of our era, there was a fight how to define what is Christianity. Many of those theologians who were fighting and explaining what Christianity is, you know, Jesus was dead. They could not ask him, you know, what to do. The work was left for theologians. And these theologians were coming from two traditions, Jewish tradition and Greek philosophical tradition. So those who were thinking could not forget what they learned before. And here is Plato. In 4th century AD, during the trouble of defining Christianity, what is it, what are we fighting about, what should people believe, how to formulate it. Among 10 people you have 15 opinions. who emerged here was a follower of Plato, Augustine, St. Augustine. In his Confessions, he describes that he was not a good guy when he was young. You know, he was chasing after girls, and he lived it up, you know, and enjoyed life, you know, as most young people do. Later on, he connected his Platonic training of his mind with Christianity and formulated in his City of God concept of Platonic Christianity, which became the blueprint for early Christianity. Being Platonic, it was otherworldly. And it stayed so, going through crisis until 13th century, 12th, 13th century, when Christianity was attacked by superior Muslim movement, which was spreading out over northern coast of Africa, coming back through Gibraltar, back to Spain, settled down in Spain. How to stop them? You know, with the otherworldly views, you know, you cannot do very much. And during this time, it became also known that Mohammedans and Caliphate had one philosophy, central philosophy. This was that of Aristotle. They adapted Aristotelian realism into their Muslim religion, and it was Aristotelian way of thinking which created great art, architecture of Muslim world. They were far more advanced than anything Christians were able to do. They were superior also in warfare. It was difficult just to realize that this was the case. The church has produced an outstanding man during this time of crisis. It was Thomas Aquinas. He decided that it is high time to change this otherworldly Christianity into something realistic, to produce new certainty, and it was Aristotle. He laid into foundation of Christianity Aristotelian realistic concept of Christianity. It changed everything entirely. Under influence of Thomas Aquinas, new type of theologians emerged. They were forgetting Platonic, otherworldly views. They became realistic. They got into fight with Muslims. They stopped Muslims. And in their great desire to build a new old society, they conceived kind of strange idea to liberate Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was in the hands of infidels. This very decision was a fatal decision for medieval church. You need soldiers.